This is Colleen Fitzwater from the Lobular Breast Cancer Alliance. Today I'll be speaking with LBCA Scientific Advisory Board member, Dr. Christopher Lee. Dr. Lee is a professor in the Public Health Sciences Division and Vice President for Faculty Affairs and Diversity at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. He's also a research professor in the University of Washington Department of Epidemiology. Dr. Lee was also recently named Associate Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Fred Hutch UW Seattle Children's Cancer Consortium, and was also recently selected as the inaugural recipient of the Helen G. Eidson Endowed Chair for Breast Cancer Research. This will support his work to develop better methods for breast cancer detection and his research on preventing metastatic recurrence. He's a cancer epidemiologist with research projects spanning cancer early detection and screening, etiology, and survivorship. Dr. Lee, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to me today.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Colleen. I really appreciate it, and it's my pleasure to be here with you today.
So can you tell me about your background and how you decided that epidemiology, or studying the causes and patterns of cancer, was the branch of medicine that you wanted to focus on?
No, thank you for that question. It kind of takes me back many years to when I was in medical school. And I think when I was in med school, I really thought I was going to just become a practicing clinician. But I actually took the summer off after my first year of medical school and came here to Seattle and did an internship in epidemiology focused on breast cancer. And that is really what that's how I caught the research bug, if you will. And sort of ever since then, I decided that I wanted to pursue a career in research. I never even got a license to practice medicine. I finished medical school, but just decided I was going to be pure research. That was where my passion was. I became engaged with a number of breast cancer advocates very early in my career. I was on the board of directors for our local Susan G. Komen affiliate for many years. And that was really what kind of got me connected into this work, kind of developed a passion for doing work on breast cancer. Of course, have a family history where my aunt died of the disease for reasons that should have been prevented. So I guess for many different reasons, that's kind of how I got into this work from the beginning.
Thanks. And I know you focused on different areas, but can you speak specifically about how you became interested in lobular breast cancer?
Yeah, so that also kind of takes me back to the beginning of when I was a PhD graduate student in epidemiology at the University of Washington. I was looking for a project for my doctoral dissertation, and my advisor connected me with a breast cancer surgeon by the name of Roger Moe at the University of Washington. And he was, I guess you could say, kind of an old school surgeon. He kept an index card with information about every single patient that he treated. And as he was kind of collecting this information patient by patient, he noticed that he was writing down the word lobular a lot more than he had before. And so he asked us if we would be willing to kind of look into this issue and to look at some of the national data to see, is the incidence rate of lobular cancer increasing? Because that is what he was observing in his patient population. And so we looked at the national data from the Cancer Registry Program. And indeed, we found that there was this rapid increase in the incidence rates of lobular cancer. And that is the impetus for a lot of the work that I did around my dissertation to really try and understand what was accounting for this increase in lobular cancer incidence. And so we designed and got funded a number of different studies to really focus on this issue that I think had, up until that point, people didn't even really think about lobular versus ductal. It was just breast cancer. And that our work was some of the first studies to really say, okay, there are these different histologic subtypes. They have very different patterns. They have very different risk factors, is what we contributed to the knowledge.
Well, thanks so much for that jump starting of that work, because we know that since then a lot more research is being done, but obviously there's more to do as well. So do you have current research taking place with lobular breast cancer?
Sure. Yes. I think that initial work that I did, now almost 20 years ago, provided a foundation for us to get a number of different grants to support our lobular cancer research. And over a period of several years, we've now put together a large cohort of lobular cancer patients. So we have, I think, over 800 patients with pure lobular cancer, another 800 with kind of the mixed ductal lobular phenotype of the disease, and then a comparison group of patients with kind of the pure ductal subtype. And so we've done extensive and continue to do extensive research on that population in terms of trying to understand what are the risk factors for lobular versus ductal breast cancer, how those risk factors may be different for patients with the mixed lobular ductal phenotype. And then we also have access to the tumor tissue samples, which continue to be used in a variety of different studies to try and really understand what are risk factors for different outcomes among lobular cancer survivors. For example, are there certain characteristics of that initial lobular cancer tumor that may be predictive of a woman's risk of developing recurrence? And so we have active collaborations with different laboratory scientists who are focused on this particular question of saying, can we identify those patients at high risk of recurrence? At the same time, we've also been looking at the blood samples that we collected on these patients and have been working with a number of different investigators to see, can we identify blood-based tools for the earlier detection of recurrence among lobular cancer patients. And so that's an active collaboration with our colleague at Cornell, who's working on some novel technologies using the blood samples that we have stored to see, can we identify not only which patients will develop a recurrence, but where will they develop a recurrence? Will it be in their bone? Will it be in their brain, in their lung? So that we could then try and guide better ways of following up patients, because a lot of patients are obviously concerned about that risk of recurrence. But if we were to say, okay, this patient has a high risk of this type of recurrence, we could do whatever type of imaging or other types of strategies to try and see if we can identify that recurrence earlier.
We're right now in National Cancer Research Month. And on behalf of LBCA, I want to thank you for all that you and other lobular breast cancer researchers, all other cancer researchers do. In your opinion, why is ILC specific research needed and why is it so important?
Yeah, I mean, I think ILC research is critically important because we know that there is this growing population of women who are diagnosed with lobular cancer. It has in many ways, you could think about it as almost a completely different type of breast cancer than the more traditional ductal type of cancer. We know that it presents a number of clinical challenges. It's much less likely to be detectable through mammographic screening, so it tends to be diagnosed at a more advanced stage of diagnosis. And we know that it has very different patterns of recurrence in terms of the different sites where patients tend to develop distant, potentially lethal metastasis. And so I think there really is a need to better understand the biology of lobular cancer, as well as ways for both on the prevention side, how we can prevent the disease, as well as on the survivorship side, how can we improve the quality of life, as well as reduce the risk of mortality for the growing number of women who are diagnosed with lobular breast cancer.
You're a member of LBCA's Scientific Advisory Board. Many of our other SAB members collaborate with not only each other, but with scientists across the globe. Why is collaboration so important?
Well, I think we're in an era of science where, you can't be an expert in every single field. It just becomes so complicated that we need to have multidisciplinary collaboration in order to really move the science forward in a synergistic and effective way. So, my field is epidemiology. I'm really focused on being able to design studies, analyze data, recruit patients, interpret study results, but I don't have, a wet lab where I can take the blood samples, the tumor tissue samples that we're collecting from patients and really apply kind of the cutting edge molecular techniques so that we can do, whether it's single cell profiling of lobular cancer cells or doing deep interrogation of blood samples to identify novel biomarkers that have clinical benefit. For those types of activities, I need to be engaged with collaborators who are at the leading edge of their fields, who are developing these new technologies so that we can have a broader impact. It's not something that any individual could really do alone. And so that's why we're just in a space where if we really want to have the impact of our science be felt by patients, we need to be working together.
So I understand that you also take part in the National Breast Cancer Coalition's Project LEAD program, which is a science training program for advocates. What do you do within the program?
Thanks for asking about this. So it's something I've been involved with Project LEAD now for several years. And so they're having a return to the in-person sessions this year. So I'm very excited about going to San Diego for that. this summer. And basically what I do is I teach all of the advocates who are in that particular cohort about epidemiology, about cancer screening, about study design, how to sort of effectively read scientific literature, what are things to look for. And then there are also small group discussions after the lecture that I participate in with different kind of problem sets. It's kind of, it's basically a boot camp for advocates. And so it's a great opportunity for me to help educate the next generation of advocates who have such an important impact on the work that we do. And also just to kind of be engaged in hearing the different stories of patients who are there wanting to give back to the breast cancer advocacy community. And so it's a great opportunity to actually hear what are the challenges they're facing, how it's helped generate some new ideas for projects and whatnot. So it's always a fun few days for me when I get to go down and spend some time with a large number of advocates.
Nice. And so you mentioned that the patient advocates have an impact. Why are patient advocates so important in ILC research?
I mean, I think it's like anything. I mean, we do team science, and when you do team science, you have to hear from a variety of different perspectives. And the patient perspective is one of, people who've actually gone through the things that we're trying to improve upon, who have different ideas, perspectives on the work that we're trying to do, help us to focus the questions. We may think something is important, but there may be other questions that are even more important that we haven't given as much consideration to. And so I think it just provides almost like a 360 review of the problem that we're trying to solve. And you can't have a full review unless you have the full spectrum of people who are impacted, both on the research side as well as on the patient and clinical side.
Wonderful. So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you before we ended this interview about your newest role as Associate Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. What do you hope comes from this focus on DEI?
I think what we're really looking for here at Fred Hutch is just some kind of continued institutional evolution and transformation as we strive to have a climate of inclusive excellence at our cancer center. I think we recognize that, cancer is a disease that impacts everyone globally, all races, all backgrounds, all socioeconomic status. And we need to make sure that the workforce that we have that is addressing these problems is one that brings in voices from all aspects of our communities. And, the National Cancer Institute has now basically put forward a mandate, if you will, that all NCI designated comprehensive cancer centers need to have a plan to enhance their diversity such that both their workforce as well as their leadership reflects the diversity of the nation. We at the Fred Hutch have a long ways to go to make it to that benchmark, but there's a lot that we can do to move things forward, and that's really what my role is to help us drive forward how we can diversify the pipeline of trainees going into cancer research, how we can diversify our faculty so that we can ensure that diverse questions and cancer disparities are being addressed in our work. And then also, how do we diversify the leadership of our organization? So that's kind of the broad mandate that I have in this role.
That's a big mandate, and we all wish you very much luck with that. So thank you. And,
yeah.
And Dr. Lee, it was great spending time with you today. And thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure.